Nick!
Sweet.
Nick!
Jesus. Can a man not get more than 3 seconds of rest in his own home? What do you want?
But you got
4,000
subscribers!
I don't believe you. Oh, jeez. Oh, God. Yeah. Oh. Okay, you gotta get out of here. Apparently I gotta do a case subs video. That's like a thing for YouTubers. So just
Can I be in this one?
No. Okay, yeah, sure.
Yay! So, what are we talking? Like the best tie-in scenes to other movies, or what?
Oh, what? No, I just want to talk about the actual credits.
Huh. That hasn't been done before, I don't think. Okay, I'm down, so what's the first?
Well...
Really?
I would have this a couple of spaces higher if we were ranking solely based on music. The Iron Man 3 theme is pretty solid, and Can You Dig It is easily its most interesting and catchy variation. It doesn't quite sound like anything else in the franchise, and like the preceding movie, it reeks of Shane Black's signature style. It also does a better job than the preceding movie at feeling like an end to a cohesive trilogy, chronicling Tony's exploits across all 3 solo films.
That's a good point on which I can definitely agree. While I don't hold it in as high regard for the fact it doesn't have original visuals, the music is not only catchy and unique, but how it's remixed with the main theme to give it a much more 70s surfer action movie vibe really just comes off to me as Marvel saying, yeah, we just topped off Avengers with another awesome movie. Look how cool we are. That kind of brassy, action-filled confidence encapsulates Iron Man's persona, and really does give a sense of how, both in and out of universe, Iron Man has grown.
You could certainly argue just making a montage out of pre-existing footage is the lazier option compared to the animated sequences that make up most of the rest of this list, but I think this is a case of making a lot with a little. The clips are all dynamic and fun and timed to the song perfectly, and all that plus the filter of Iron Man colors and film grain effects give it a very classic 70s action vibe.
Agreed, and not only does it give it that sense, but the color scheme itself and how the filters go over the actors' faces really does remind me of a Marvel comic cover or eye catch.
I could easily see why someone's list wouldn't even include this sequence, but it scratches too many of my itches just right to be left off. Plus, hey, if any of the Iron Man sequences had to make it on this list, I'm glad it was the best one of the 3.
Except it isn't.
Huh?
I am Iron Man.
Really? This one? In contrast to the last entry, if we were ranking solely based on music, this one probably wouldn't even be on the list. Heck, it probably wouldn't be here regardless were I doing this list alone. Even if I were in love with I Am Iron Man as a song, which I'm not, for the purposes of this list, I dock major points for a sequence using licensed music instead of original score. It doesn't help that I Am Iron Man isn't even really about Iron Man, so much as it is about the Iron Giant, or rather the poem that the Iron Giant is loosely based off of, look it up. Personally, I really wanted that to be a no-flex rule, and if I were gonna break it for anything, it'd probably go to the pretty neat ending sequence for Captain Marvel, so consider that an honorable mention. With that said, Eden was fairly adamant about including this one. The compromises I make for love, I guess. Being completely fair, it's not like I don't have nice things to say about this one. The song does fit tonally with Tony's headspace in the immediately preceding scene, and it's in line with his musical taste throughout the rest of the film.
I'm not even particularly adamant about the song, and I can see where you're coming from, but considering it's the first movie, and like you said, does tie in with Tony's state of mind and love of the genre, I don't particularly hold it against them. One thing that really grips me to this ending sequence is how smoothly it connects to the end of the movie. After a slightly tense and a little bit awkward scene of Tony revealing his identity, the movie cuts straight from the line, I am Iron Man, to the song of the same name, which I think really reimburses the fact that Tony ends the film completely confident in this part of being who he is.
I will say that I like how the visuals of Iron Man schematics have an interesting, grainy film stock style to them, and overall it fits for the simpler, more down-to-earth movie that Iron Man is.
And with that said, I'm a sucker for a blueprint-like aesthetic, and seeing as an end credit sequence has to include, credits, I really appreciate the integration of the names of the actors. It sounds like a weird point, but seeing as this is all a representation of the planning and building up Iron Man, I like that the names being next to the different parts and programs of the suit show that Tony isn't solely responsible for the creation of Iron Man. Everyone connected to him plays their own little part.
This is really the opposite of the last pick. I can more easily understand why someone else might love this sequence.
That someone else is me, by the way. If you couldn't tell, it's me.
But it's less to my own tastes. I don't know, you want to open this one, Eden? Eden?
Oh, look at all the Spanish colors. Look at the pretty animation.
Okay, never mind. Like the last pick, this is one where I don't necessarily think the animation itself is all that strong. It's just kaleidoscopy nonsense visually, but it's good kaleidoscopy nonsense, and man is it bolstered by how much I love Doctor Strange's theme. I find this whole OST remarkably underappreciated, and Strange Days Ahead in particular is an amazing track. Granted, what we get in the film is an abridged version that skips some of my favorite parts, but even then, what we're left with is killer in my opinion. It's totally fitting for the story and character it's attached to, with Michael Giacchino providing a sense of majesty befitting the master of the mystic arts, along with a touch of darkness and general weirdness embodied by Strange's signature instrument, the harpsichord.
Oh, is that what that's called? Huh.
Oh, so you're paying attention again? Neat. Add to the conversation, please.
Adding on to what was said before, the aforementioned kaleidoscopy nonsense with its shifting and circling, sharp and curved shapes does slightly remind me of the opening to Casino Royale, and there is nothing wrong with reminding me of the opening to Casino Royale. There is also nothing wrong with using my favorite color combination of black and gold and then adding red tinting to said gold. Now, I might be getting too deep here, but given the use of chakra and general Eastern practices shown by the sorcerers, I don't think it's too far a leap to say that there's some Buddhist inspiration in this movie. And with red being the color that represents things that are sacred, and gold being the color to represent separation from materialism and selfishness, it kind of visually shows the entirety of Strange's arc.
Plus, it's just trippy, and I like that. Putting this one here is admittedly somewhat of another concession on my part. I do really like the Civil War theme, don't get me wrong, and there is a lot about the imagery that I appreciate. The broken, ruined backdrop not only portrays the broken state of the Avengers team, but also makes it clear we're looking at an Avengers battlefield. Looking at how bleak and decimated this nondescript place looks after the heroes got their hands on it reflects perfectly the preceding story about collateral damage and unchecked power, capped perfectly by the shadow of broken foundations under the credit for Daniel Bruhl.
Hey, now that Endgame happened, doesn't that mean that technically Zemo won entirely? Anyway, speaking of those shadows, there's a lot of little things I like about them. In particular, the first one being a star, which could represent both the one on Steve's shield and the one on Bucky's arm, seeing as they are the driving forces of the movie. Zemo being represented by something falling apart, the cat scratches on Chadwick Boseman's credit, and the singular line of Marissa Tomei's credit that pans up to an entire spiderweb for Tom Holland are nice touches too.
The character and scene iconography represented by these shadows is a neat idea that doesn't quite look as great as it could, though it does help, along with the damage, to sell a darker, melancholy mood befitting of the film's ending. There's something genuinely sad about the idea of just staring down at a worn battlefield, now populated only by the literal shadows of those who fought there. A grim reminder that what used to be there is now only a shade of its former self.
And we are officially getting too existential. Moving on. Ah, yes, now this is better. Something simple and playful and not at all a grim reminder of a horrible loss on behalf of characters we like.
Yeah, that's saved for the scene after these credits.
Shut up!
This sequence denotes a sense of inspiration from those involved that I honestly wish was more present in the actual movie. The idea to retell the events of the film with actual plastic miniatures is just genius in my opinion, And more than any other sequence on this list, this is the one I'd most love to see the creative process behind. Fittingly, it uses Hope's theme instead of Scott's, which I find more fitting for the sequence.
And, just more fitting of a beat-em-up action romp than an Ocean-style heist track.
I don't have all that much to say about this one, I just think it's a really creative idea executed in a pleasing and dynamic way, along with a neat song.
Well said! It gives me studio-like vibes, but otherwise, I got nothing. I'm just here for Hot Wheels and Luis.
See, not all these things have to make us think about things like war and conflict and people suffering emotionally. Oh, damn it!
No, it's okay. This is a happy depiction of war and violence.
Oh, yay! Okay, so maybe triumphant is a better word than happy here. From this pick forward, the key word is iconography, and this sequence is alone in the pack for being so much about iconography and capturing the feel and tone of the movie you just saw that it doesn't even feature the characters. Just a series of wartime imagery evocative of the period setting, and God is it good. I've always felt that the first Captain America theme was another severely underrated leitmotif, and its small but consistent appearances in later films really make it feel appropriately like the specific theme of 40s Steve Rogers, brimming with optimism and an uncynical approach to the war. The painterly style of the images themselves, aside from calling back to that era, also adds to that feeling. Every soldier depicted feels like a larger-than-life hero, and the old-timey skirmishes and weaponry are all made as beautiful and dynamic to look at as it's possible for a horrible, horrible war to look. You could argue it's a bit of a problem to end this movie on a note which leans so intentionally on a propagandistic mood, especially coming off the tragedy of Steve's sacrifice, but I think it enhances the sense of legacy he left behind, capturing a similar feeling to the Star-Spangled Man with a Plan scene. As has been noted by bigger channels than this one, what the MCU is attempting to say about war at any given time is pretty inconsistent, so it can't help but nickel at me that such an aggrandizing sequence is doing its job so efficiently, but it absolutely works as a throwback to the times.
I'll say this much, given just how much the credits sequence both on and off this list are about stylistically capturing actual moments from the film, I wouldn't say no to more MCU credit sequences like this one that are more dedicated to capturing the setting and feelings surrounding the story, while hardly centering on the actual figures or events involved at all. As it is now, it makes for a sequence unique among the pack.
In a movie partially about Steve's nature as symbol first and man second, it's a neat symbolic representation of who he was, rather than literal. Overall, a damn fine sequence and the best of the Captain America trilogy. Why are you looking at me like that? Oh, right. That. This is yet another one that's difficult to say much about, as what makes it work is fairly obvious. Winter Soldier's got a great, fitting theme, and it's the best example in the franchise of the whole portraying dynamic and iconic imagery from the film in silhouette form tactic. The stark black and white and occasional red makes this a memorable one, with my favorite image actually being the last, with Pierce looming below as the stripes of the American flag are filtered through the SHIELD logo to become corrupting red tendrils that edge closer to Fury.
I think this one carries a constantly moving symbols motif in a way that Civil War was attempting to do, and that we will see again in Black Panther. It is very Bond-like, understandably for what's basically Marvel's version of an espionage spy film. Aside from the scene Nick mentioned of Pierce and Fury, there are dozens of little details, not only of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s corruption, but the idea that Cap, not having S.H.I.E.L.D. at his back, and being in a completely different country than the one he has known, is alone. He is constantly surrounded by the black barriers that are transformed into gears and then the American flag stripes. Then the gears shift into tentacles as recognition that Hydra is truly behind the scenes. The American flag is jointed and boxed, secluding Steve completely until he has to break through the stripes. This entire movie, of course, is about the idea of what Captain America stands for in a time when America is far more shady and far less patriotic. I like that we never see the Star-Spangled Banner in its completion, especially with the fact that we almost never have the attention of a certain frame placed on more than one star. First, it's highlighted on Steve's shield, then Bucky's arm. Not only is this formation highlighting the character of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Hydra, but also the individuality of each of the characters. Bucky's shadow is stars, representing that he has left allegiance to Cap and America behind, while the star on his arm is a communist red to show his now Russian training and background. Scarlett Johansson is completely white against a black background, which I think is a lovely touch to show that Natasha has separated herself from the darkness that is both S.H.I.E.L.D. and Hydra. Frank Grillo slowly becomes 4 different silhouettes, which I believe either means that he's a pawn for Hydra, or just that he has the strength of one squad.
That's an interesting take. Personally, I always read it as Rumlow being the typical exemplar of a Hydra operative. In the context of the movie, he really is the stand-in for their average foot soldier, so we have to assume that he's the mold which all of the typical Hydra guys fall into.
My personal favorite and absolutely heartbreaking little detail is that Peggy is a compass, as she's Steve's moral guidance, but the spinning of said compass as it shifts into the spinning tape of Zola's computerized self shows that Peggy, guide and founder of S.H.I.E.L.D., had her creation overtaken from the beginning by the very thing she was trying to defeat. Add all of that to the fact that each silhouette has extra detail to show you perfectly what actor it's referencing, and a series of violins and brass that just keeps growing and growing and growing and even becomes discordant, and while it isn't number 1 on this list, you get what I believe to be the credit sequence that most represents its movie and what it stands for.
Sure, if you mean literally.
How else would I mean it?
Thematically? You're right. I've always said that if I could, I would have a life-sized version of this statue in our backyard. If there's one thing Joss Whedon loves, it's filtering his characters through a theological lens, and with superheroes already being regularly compared to Greek myths, it only makes sense that he'd end his opus with this sequence depicting the Avengers as literal gods. I love it so much.
Age of Ultron is in so many ways a movie about all the Avengers achieving a sort of legendary godhood status, and the way that comes through in the reverent pans over this Marvel statue, depicting the team's fight with Ultron, accompanied by the sweeping, glorious theme, is just immensely cathartic. It gives the impression that much like the gods, the exploits of Earth's mightiest heroes will be the stuff of legend, both in and out of universe, for centuries to come. It really is so simple for how much we love it, but more than almost any other, this sequence actively enhances the movie in front of it. Without even being a scene unto itself, the sequence is a genuine part of the story, and the movie would be lesser without it.
I really appreciate how the theme for this film took the traditional Silvestri Avengers motif and tweaked it, experimenting to make it still recognizable but a touch darker and more consistent in the grandiosity. For a franchise about the inherent humanity of these characters, I love this sequence for highlighting the way in which they are also unavoidably larger-than-life mythical figures to aspire to. It's honestly kinda perfect, as can be said for the next 2 on this list. Speaking of which, this is the one instance where one of these sequences doesn't play over a piece of score, and yet I'm totally fine with it. Not only is All the Stars an original song for this movie, it's a spectacular song, and one I still listen to casually on the regular. On top of that, it's also more fitting for the visuals than any of the recurring motifs in the score would be, in my opinion. Like the film as a whole, the song strikes a perfect balance of fun in the bob your head along kind of way, and also a bit moody and contemplative. The sequence itself is straight up beautiful, with scenes and sets from the movie rendered in black sand against shifting solid color backgrounds. My favorite bit has to be the credits for Boseman and Jordan, which portray their characters against their signature colors, clad at first in their armor, only to have it stripped away as they stand off against one another. Wind and light effects are used to subtly call back to the train which passes between them in their climactic fight, and adds a sense of intensity which really gives life to this couple of seconds. This is iconic stuff.
All the Stars became an eventual Grammy and Oscar nominee for a reason. It is this perfect mix of solemn and reflective and hopeful, and the poppy and deliberate visuals reflect that. As previously mentioned, the movie gets points for having great transitions between the end scene and the actual credits, with Black Panther rivaling the first Iron Man for best example. T'Challa is asked who he is, and rather than anything being spoken, the credits immediately bring us to the image of a Black Panther with that beautiful purple background and then a throne. While I, like Nick, adore the sequence of T'Challa and Eric, my favorite part is even smaller. Shuri and M'Baku's symbols are played as opposite sides, almost like a coin. You have the technology and tradition represented that illustrates the diversity of the characters and what makes Wakanda. There's tons of other little details. The visuals pumping to the beat of the music, the Dora Milaje slamming down their spears directly after the throne, and then building up Wakanda. All the shapes breaking down into African clothing designs, the beat smoothing out to SZA's beautiful, beautiful voice as she sings that last "Let's Talk About Love." And that lyric reflects how, to quote Genius, T'Challa is struggling not only with his new position, but with increasingly complicated relationships of love, with his family, his friend, his love, and his people. It's so good, goddammit, I love it so much!
Okay, keep some enthusiasm in the tank, we've still got one more to talk about. Much like the case with Ultron's ending music, Main on End is one of my very favorite tracks across any of these movies. It's both grand and emotional, but also kind of subtle and low-key, befitting a movie that's both a celebration and a bittersweet goodbye to the dynamics of this franchise as we've known it. I shouldn't like how this one opts to just play old footage rather than have a unique original sequence, but in the given context, there's really not a better word for it than classy. More than any other credit sequence, this one feels like a curtain call, a reminder of the 11-year journey we've had building to this and the choice of having a ray of light shining down on the screen, plus the soft focus over all the footage is such a simple choice that creates such a beautiful effect. Lastly, of course, there's the mains ending off by giving their signatures, Star Trek style. It's frankly kind of amazing how much a bunch of simple gestures such as these can create such a profound impact given the right context.
Dang it! You took all the good points.
Well, I guess you're just going to have to improvise, aren't you?
Well, I don't know if anyone's pointed this out yet, but the order that they did the end credits for Endgame was the exact opposite of the ones they did for the original Avengers. In the 2012 movie, it went Robert Downey Jr. to Chris Evans to Mark Ruffalo to Chris Hemsworth to Scarlett Johansson to Jeremy Renner. And then for Endgame, it started with Jeremy, then to Scarlett, then to Hemsworth, then to Mark, then Chris Evans, and ended with Robert Downey Jr. I just love that counterbalance. The idea that you can see from the beginning to the end of the Infinity Saga that every Avenger gets an equal amount of recognition and status. The signatures of the actors just show how synonymous they are with their characters. There's also the way we lead into the sequence. The closing on a classic 40s song with beautiful orchestration, all the way to the Gaussian-filtered and beautifully rendered spotlight on every single character is just a sign that Endgame, with the rest of the MCU up to this point, is not only a celebration, but a bona fide classic in the likes of Wizard of Oz or Gone with the Wind. It is a great message of pride, amplified, of course, by the shock wave that flows through the audience as every actor appears. I seriously don't think I would love it as much without remembering the tears and cheers that were shed through the theater every time. Even with a sequence comprised solely of already used footage, this one definitely has a favorite moment, and it's Iron Man's repulsor acting as a spotlight to Robert Downey Jr.'s credit. It is beautiful and the most emotional send-off one could ask for. Truly a testament to how beloved the Marvel Cinematic Universe has become.
And that's the list. If anyone has their feelings about our picks, or if you've given any thought whatsoever to what your favorite Marvel credit sequences would look like, then feel free to sound off in the comments. Like and subscribe if you haven't already and you want to see more content like this.